Hello, I'm Alex from BC Designer. The number and complexity of cybersecurity challenges has increased over the last decade. A comprehensive data security strategy is must today. In this tutorial, we will discuss how to create such a strategy. We'll talk about the root cause of data breaches, the ways to create response strategy, and quantify it with KPIs. Let's start with a general question. Why do we need a cybersecurity strategy? A formal strategy is a good base for further discussions. For example, when all the risks and risk mitigation strategies are visualized on a single strategy map, it is easier to justify budgets for cybersecurity initiatives. A formally described strategy makes it possible to align cybersecurity initiatives with other parts of the organization strategy. For example, with the talent scorecard, IT scorecard, or scorecards for risk scenarios. In a good strategy, the goals are quantified with performance indicators. So instead of vague ideas like create a highly secure business environment that leverages the latest technologies, your team would need to formulate some more specific goals and how to quantify them. This approach gets all the discussion to the next level, where the goals and expected results are clearly defined. What is cybersecurity and how is it different from data security and data privacy? For example, if you use a contact form on a website, your email address should only be used to respond to your query, not subscribe you to the marketing mail list or disclosure to other companies. That's data privacy or data protection, ethical and legal use of data. At the same time, the customer service agent will need to verify your identity, access the internal database, update some information, and so on. All this requires secure IT architecture, which is where data security is involved. The cybersecurity term typically covers a wider range of ideas, including not only data security or data privacy, but other security systems. Will the cybersecurity strategy prevent data breaches? In the case of cybersecurity, it seems that we deal with something unknown, hard to predict and quantify. That's true. It's hard to predict what company will be the victim of the next hacker attack. At the same time, we have access to detailed root cause analysis of the typical data breaches. It results that most data breaches are caused by known factors, such as compromised credentials and phishing. Will the cybersecurity strategy prevent data breaches? While we cannot prevent all data breaches, we can be prepared and minimize their impact on the organization. In BC Designer, we have a number of scorecard templates available for our users, including those who use the tool under the free plan. One of those templates is Cybersecurity Strategy Scorecard. It follows the classical balanced scorecard model with four perspectives. In the stakeholders and customer perspective, we map the expected outcomes of strategy execution. A typical goal for the stakeholders is to reduce the potential damage from data breaches. A typical expectation of the customers is effective mitigation of the data security and data protection risks. The next two perspectives are the drivers of the strategy. In the internal perspective, we have the goals related to security automation, creating response teams and response plans. In the learning perspective, we focus on the goals of educating employees and testing their business environment. Now, let's discuss the specific goals in each perspective. Finance or stakeholders' interests perspective. Here we typically formulate the expected results for the stakeholders. As we discussed before, we cannot avoid all data related risks, but we can minimize their impact. How to quantify their impact in this case? We can use the industry benchmarks for the data breach cost per record and multiply it by the number of records. In this way, we calculate the direct costs, such as the costs of forensic analysis, finance, and compensations to the customers. We can calculate indirect costs, such as the cost of the lost opportunities, the cost of losing existing customers, partners, or employees because of data breaches. For the customer perspective, the key goal is formulated as mitigate data security and data protection risks. This goal is quantified by the leading indicator, early detection and fast response to the data risks, which is the output of the goal from the internal perspective. Another leading indicator is data protection readiness. Finally, we have a lagging indicator, weighted risk index. The logic here is that the organization works on the internal security systems quantified by early detection and fast response indicator and introduces the necessary data protection measures quantified by data protection readiness. The achieved improvements are validated by weighted risk index. What is a weighted risk index? This indicator quantifies the current risk level that the organization is dealing with. To do this, we categorize the data breaches by their impact level, from critical risk events with weight of 70% to low-level risk events with weight 3%. This approach addresses the problem of possible manipulation of the measurement system when the indicator is moved to the green zone by solving less significant issues instead of solving real problems. What about the data protection readiness indicator? As explained before, data protection is about the ethical and lawful use of personal information. The protection measures in this case are well formulated by the applicable legislation. If we take the GDPR in Europe as an example, then data protection readiness can be calculated using binary metrics. In this case, the metrics are something like data protection officer nominated, explicit consent tracking implemented, data breach reporting procedure implemented, and so on. Let's move to the internal perspective and discuss the drivers of the strategy. Here we have the goals like early detection and fast response to the data risks, develop a risk mitigation plan, reduce the complexity. Why these very goals? How to formulate the goals for your case? To find the goals and the performance indicators for the internal perspective, we need to do the root cause analysis of the data breaches, analyze the risk and cost points, and come up with a response strategy. The reports by IBM Security and Verizon that I mentioned before include some common strategies applicable to most organizations. In our template, the general goal is formulated as early detection and fast response to the data risks. This goal is quantified by two lagging indicators: mean time to detect and mean time to respond. Lagging indicators show what already happened. What can we do to improve the performance of these indicators? In the mentioned reports, you can find some recommendations that lead to a better data security response. We formulated them as initiatives aligned with the goal. There is a success factor, having formed incident response teams. According to the IBM security report, it is one of the effective ways to minimize data breach impact. Another initiative is detection of high risk data access, which will help to prioritize the efforts of cybersecurity team. There are two more goals in the internal perspective: develop a risk mitigation plan and reduce complexity of IT. They contribute to the early detection goal as success factors, and their login performance is shown as leading indicators. Let's look at the develop a risk mitigation plan goal. How can we make sure that the existing plan for data security is good one? It should be based on an up-to-date risk model that reflects the way data is managed in the organization. On the strategy scorecard, this is quantified by regular data security audits, leading indicator that is explained in the learning perspective. How do we know that the suggested risk response plan is actually effective? Together with the regular updates of the risk model, we could test the application of the developed plan in practice. This is quantified by the login indicator, incident response testing. What about the goal reduce the complexity of IT and data? There are several factors that impact data breach cost. IT infrastructure complexity, data complexity, and automation. On the strategy map, we formulated these factors within this goal. Decrease complexities of data and IT is a rationale for the goal. Limit access to the most valuable data is one of the success factors in decreasing the complexity of required IT solutions. Automate vulnerability testing and compliance is a broad initiative for IT automation of security. To quantify the complexity, we use the Data Security Complexity Index that is compiled of several indicators. For example, there is number of users with the highest access level. The optimization function for this indicator is set to minimize. Reducing the number of users with access to sensitive data will improve the overall performance of the index. 7% of data breaches are root caused by malicious insider. For this reason, another indicator is time to deactivate login credentials. Another metric that forms this index is percent of up-to-date security software. This metric looks like a simple one, but studies show that the root cause of 16% of data breaches is a vulnerability in third-party software. Each indicator that forms the index has its own weight. The relevant weight shows how the indicator impacts the overall performance of the index compared to other indicators in the index. In the description, you will find the link to the article that explains how such scorecards are calculated. These indicators are just examples of some metrics that can quantify the complexity in the case of data security. A more robust approach to complexity should include a deep analysis of the stakeholders, finding points of bad complexities, and elaborating strategy of complexity reduction. In the description for this tutorial, I will share the link to the article where we discussed complexity metrics in detail. Let's now move to the learning and growth perspective. In this perspective, we have two big goals. Regular data security audits goal that helps to focus on proper infrastructure for data security, and train employees on data security goal that focuses on giving your team the up-to-date knowledge and skills necessary to prevent data breaches and minimize their impact. Let's have a look at how these goals are formulated on the strategy map. In strategic planning, understanding context is critical. For example, what is the reasoning behind the regular data security audits? What kind of risks are we looking for? To answer these questions, the Analyze Cybersecurity Rationale is formulated in the template. In the description for this rationale, we can find the examples of the risks, like cyber attacks, ransomware, lost or stolen credentials, and so on. Strategy is also about dealing with unknown. In this case, there is a hypothesis that remote work is impacting data security. For many organizations, remote work was a part of their COVID response strategy. With this hypothesis on the strategy map, your security team will have a starting point to look for possible risks and solutions. There are two leading indicators: regular risks analysis, a general analysis of the new risks, and regularly assess the risk of sensitive data, a more specific analysis in the context of sensitive data. Both indicators are configured in the template to be updated on quarterly basis. There are several metrics that help to validate the efforts of security team in analyzing the current risk situation and learning from it. Automated vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, simulation of cyber attack, red team testing, security testing on a larger scale that involves more participants. In the template, the update intervals for these KPIs are configured in different ways. For example, the most resource demanding red team testing indicator is configured to the annual update interval. The risk analysis and testing procedures are designed to find weak spots in the security system. But how do we know that the takeaways of those simulations and tests are effectively implemented? To find the answer to this question, we track the number of returning data breaches. If the data breach of the same type repeats, it is a sign that the risk mitigation plan suggested by the security team is not as effective as expected. The human factor remains one of the highest risks of any data security system. According to the IBM Security Report, around 36% of malicious data breaches are associated with human behavior, phishing, social engineering, compromised credentials. How can the data security strategy be designed to mitigate those risks effectively? One of the solutions is to automate certain operations and reduce the role of the human operator. It resonates a lot with the complexity reduction goal that we discussed in the internal perspective. For the rest of the cases, where automation is not possible or doesn't make economic sense, education is an answer. How to focus educational efforts in the context of data security? We can use a pair of leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicator, the data security training penetration rate, can be used to track the coverage of data security awareness training, where the participants can learn, for example, about phishing practices and the way to avoid them. The best login indicator in this case should be focused on the tangible impact of the awareness training. For example, if understanding phishing practices was one of the topics of the training, then reproduce a real phishing scenario and see if employees actually use the takeaways of the training. This can be quantified with the phishing test success rate indicator. We reviewed the template for cybersecurity strategy. Let me summarize some key ideas. There are known risk factors of data breaches, as well as proven ways to minimize the impact of security incidents. Focus your strategy on detecting problems early and responding fast. To decrease the impact of data breaches, have a risk mitigation plan, have a response team, reduce bad complexities, update risk models regularly, test security environment. Finally, educate your team, as the human factor is one of the key risks. What's next? Use the strategy template discussed in this tutorial as a starting point for your own data security strategy. In this case, the software will automate all the calculations, help to formulate risk mitigation plans, build dashboards, create performance reports, and much more. A number of onboarding tutorials will help your team to get started quickly. Thank you for your time. Feel free to share your challenges and findings in the comments.